Looky what we found at the thrift store. A homemade little flat file cabinet that was looking really outdated and just honestly plain blah. And it was only $30. Before I bought it, I checked to make sure that all of the drawers worked well, and I scratched at it to make sure the paint was sticking well, because I did not want to strip all of that paint off. I hated how far the top stuck out on the front, and then how there was like another overhang on the very bottom. It just looked too much like a built-in workbench to me. It just reminded me of like a staircase. So I cut the top off with a circular saw and clamped a piece of wood on as a guide to help me cut straight. Then I cut wood to cover up that overhang on the bottom. It all fit almost perfectly, which is so amazing for me with these miter cuts. I also cut some 2x4-inch supports to help support the front trim and to give something to attach it to. And then I nailed the trim on with my brad nailer. If you look really closely at the corner here, you can see that the corner didn't go all the way down past the trim, so I filled that in with some quick wood. I shaped it the best I could so then I wouldn't need to sand it much after it all dried. And then I filled in those middle hardware holes, as well as a corner on one of the drawers that was chipped a little bit. Then I realized that I didn't clean everything yet, so I cleaned it all off with an old damp rag and some Kreg cutter. You know that this stuff is my favorite stuff. Then I filled in some other holes and cracks with wood filler. And then I waited for everything to dry. About an hour later, I lightly sanded everything with 220 grit sandpaper, mostly focusing on the wood filler and the quick wood, but also lightly scuff sanding to help the paint stick, and sanding the edges of that new wood to make it not look like new wood. Then I cleaned up all of the dust with my shop vac. A couple of hours before, I painted a sample of some of the Fusion mineral paint on the back, so I just scratched at it before going any further. It didn't scratch at all, so that was awesome. And this back wasn't scuff sanded at all beforehand. So I could move forward with the project knowing that the paint should all stick well. Then I rolled on some tinted bin shellac primer with the Sherwin-Williams mohair roller that has a really thin nap. I mostly primed the brand new wood and rolled it on as thin as I could, but then I got carried away and started priming some of the rest of the piece. I don't really know why I did it, but hey, it actually all worked really well, and I didn't even feel the need to sand down the texture that the primer left behind before I painted. Alright, time for the paint. I used Fusion mineral paint in the color Coal Black, and I put it in what is becoming my very favorite budget-friendly paint sprayer. I put it through the fine mesh filter to make sure there wasn't any dried paint or random debris in the paint that could clog the sprayer, and then I added a little bit of water like I always do to thin the paint out so it would leave a better looking finish behind. I tested the spray before I started spraying my little cabinet, and then I sprayed everything. It sprayed on so well. I've honestly had some issues in the past with spraying Fusion, but this time it was an absolute dream. Since the insides of the drawers were painted before, I set them all out so I could spray the insides with this black paint. Oh, also, I chose this paint this time because I wanted an almost matte finish. I didn't want it to have much of a sheen because I think the matte finish looks better on these old homemade pieces. And Fusion dries to a very durable matte finish. I let the paint dry for a couple of hours and then I sanded it with a fine grit foam pad to make it feel smoother to the touch. And then I cleaned off all of the dust and sprayed a second coat of paint. A pint of paint was barely enough to paint this cabinet with 2 coats of paint. Most of the drawers only got 1 coat inside and then some touch-ups with a paintbrush where it needed some more paint. So after the second coat of paint dried, I brushed a coat of Fusion's beeswax all over just to give the matte finish a tiny bit of sheen. so it won't get dirty looking when you touch it. Matte paint does that and it bothers me. While that wax was soaking in, I rubbed some paper all over it to smooth out the nubs and just make the paint finish feel smoother. I usually do this with a brown paper bag, but I didn't have any on hand, so this white piece of paper is what worked. An hour or so later, I wiped off the excess wax with a lint-free rag. Then to finish everything off, I put new hardware on all 7 drawers. I used this hardware Kreg jig to help me put the card catalog labels on without wanting to pull my hair out. Basically, I marked where center was on the drawer by making a mark on a piece of frog tape. And I adjusted the holes so they were the right distance for these label holders' holes. Then I measured how far down center was so I could put the backrest thing on the jig to that measurement. On this specific drawer, the center of the drawers was down 1 3/4 inch from the top. Then I lined the jig up with the center of the drawer and used my Kreg clamp to clamp the jig in place. And then I drilled the holes and screwed the label holder in place. And I put more boring black knobs on because I'm boring and I like black on black. Oh, and yeah, the frog tape pulled off some of the wax, so I just went back with the rag that had some wax on it and just put more wax on in those areas. And then I let the wax dry for a couple more days so it wouldn't leave marks every time I touched it. Before I share what it looks like now, please take a second to hit the like and subscribe buttons and leave us a comment. It really helps get our videos out to more people, and we really appreciate your love and support. Alright, here is what it looked like before. And here's what it looks like now. The way it was before, it just looked like it belonged in a garage workshop, but now I wish that I had space for it in my own home as an accent table or some storage in my office, but I don't have room, so it will be sold. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.